Okay, I think the majority of people are on now, so I'll keep admitting folks as they want to come on. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Art Club with the Peoria Riverfront Museum. Thank you for joining today. I'm Heather Placco, and I'm excited to be hosting local artist Dana Baldwin for today's Art Club presentation. This Zoom presentation will be recorded and uploaded to the museum's YouTube account following the presentation. If you do not want your image or video visible, please feel free to stop your video from view. I've muted everyone to begin with, so please keep your video muted until the end of the presentation. At the end, Dana invites questions and comments, so please feel free to unmute yourself either temporarily using the spacebar or on your keyboard, or unmute using the button at the top. Alternatively, if you don't wish to ask, feel free to leave a question in the comment section, in the comment box, and I'll ask the question for you. So without further ado, a big welcome to Dana Baldwin to Art Club.
Thanks, Heather. I want to ask you all a question. Did you know that during the Renaissance, the greatest and most expensive art was fiber art? It wasn't the paintings. Everybody is led to believe that the paintings held the preeminent position, but that's not true. Throughout most of the Renaissance and well into the 17th century, it was the woven tapestries that held the preeminent position. So when Mary Ruth Ginn and I opened the Sheared Edge at the studios on Sheridan about 8 years ago, our primary goal was to educate the public about fiber art. I don't know what it is in America, but fiber art gets such a bad rap. It is seen as less than art, a joke, something to be relegated to the sidelines, maybe referred to as the redheaded stepchild of fine art. But we knew differently. And our goal was to educate people about that. With painting, for example, you have paint by numbers, and then you have somebody like a Michelangelo. Well, it's the same way with fiber art. We have those cheap, awful looking crocheted toilet paper covers, and people think that's fiber art. That's not fiber art. That's the equivalent of paint by numbers. Then you have the extravagant and beautifully woven tapestries. My name's Dana Baldwin. I'm a fiber artist, and the two questions I'm asked most frequently are, why do you make the big dresses, and where do you get your inspiration? So for the first time today, I'm going to answer those questions, tell you a little bit about my process, and let you know where things are. So I'm going to jump right in. I have some exciting things to tell you. First of all, I was born, this was my introduction to planet Earth, New Orleans, Louisiana. And John Heller gave me this great image of a Mardi Gras tree. I think it sums it up quite nicely because it's a place where we don't always understand where fantasy ends and reality begins. You know, if you were new to New Orleans and saw this, you'd be wondering like, I know it's a tree. I'm not quite sure what those blooms are. I don't really know what's going on, but I know I really like it. So this sums it up quite nicely. Everything in my life is filtered, especially my art, through the lens of New Orleans. When I was 9, my father, a military doctor, was transferred to Torrejon Air Force Base outside of Madrid, Spain. So my family lived in Spain for 3 years. And living there had a very profound effect on my life. My mother was an artist, and she was taking art classes at the Prado Museum in downtown Madrid. So she would come home and talk about the paintings she saw and wanted to take us on a tour. So we went on a tour of the Prado, and this is a day that changed my life forever. This is where I get most of my inspiration. I didn't realize it, and I think I told you, Heather, when you and Bill asked me to speak, I had no idea where I got my inspiration. I'm like, it's just in my DNA, I don't know where I get it. But it's the Prado, and it's been fun reliving this. So I'm going to take you on a little tour, show you some of the paintings and some of the dresses that were inspired by what I saw at the Prado. Let's start with Las Meninas by Diego Velázquez. This painting, Las Meninas, means ladies in waiting. It is by far the most famous painting at the Prado. It's large, it's about 9 by 10 feet. It is to the Prado what the Mona Lisa is to the Louvre. And I don't know if any of you have been to the Prado and experienced how you view this painting. The painting is hanging on one wall. On the opposite wall is a large mirror. So you walk in between the painting and the mirror, and it gives the illusion that you are actually in the painting with the people. For the purpose today, I could get into the complicated academics of the lighting and the reflections, but that's not the purpose. I want you to see the art as I saw the art through the eyes of a 10-year-old little girl. That's key to understanding why I do what I do. We can obviously see that it did influence my haute couture rustic. But let me first of all address the three questions I had about the painting. I wanted to know, who is the little girl in the middle? What's the deal with the dwarfs? Why do I keep seeing so many dwarfs in the paintings with royalty? What's going on there? And then I wanted to know about the dresses. What was that fabric and why were they shaped like that? So first of all, I'll tell you the little girl is La Infanta Margarita Teresa. She's a princess. She was the favorite daughter of King Philip IV of Spain. She grew up and married Leopold I, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, and he was also her uncle. And throughout her marriage, from the time she was 16 until she was 21, it was a brief marriage. She died in childbirth, but she referred to him as uncle. That's what she called him. The dwarfs were big business during the Renaissance and before. The royal houses in Europe bought and sold dwarfs. Dwarfs were even bred specifically for the purpose of being dwarfs. And the reason royalty wanted them around was because their short stature elevated the stature of the king and queen, causing the king and queen to appear more imposing. I will tell you the female dwarf, her name is Maribarbola. She's from Germany, and the little boy is Nicholas. He was from Italy, and he and the princess are about the same age, about 6 years of age. Okay, now we get to the interesting part about the dresses. Why are they wearing dresses like this? We have to understand that late 15th century, Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain financed Columbus's trip to America. And what he discovered was lots and lots and lots of gold. Spain became immensely wealthy. They were also very powerful with the consolidation of Castilla and Aragon between the marriage of Isabella and Ferdinand. Spain was also the fashion capital of the world at this time. And what they wanted to do was show off their wealth. So somebody came up with the idea of a farthingale. That is what is holding the dresses in this shape. My shape is a pannier hoop. It's very similar. It was developed 100 years later. Let me show you what they look like. So this is the farthingale. The original farthingale was more conical shaped. This is a later farthingale. It looks like a big wheel. And you can see the pannier hoop is flat in the front and flat in the back. It's really all about the hips. So with Spain being the fashion capital of the world, they had two major weaving centers, one in Sevilla and one in Valencia. The Moors brought silk to Spain. Remember, they were in Spain for 800 years, from the 8th century to the 16th century. So the Spanish had silk. Now they had all of this gold and silver. So the fabrics were woven with the silk and real gold and real silver. That's what gave the fabrics this rich and beautiful look. Many of the fabrics were then embellished with silver or gold embroidery, precious stones like rubies and pearls. Anytime you see that, that's a holdover from the Moors. So the farthingale is, if you will, a type of canvas, a way for the Spanish to display their wealth. It's a marketing tool. So the bigger, the better. That's what that was all about. And when they would sit down, it would just collapse like an accordion. Now, my dress is an 18th century French royal court dress called haute couture rustic. And yes, I realize haute couture is redundant, but that's what I decided to name it anyway. I like the name. I made my dress out of burlap because I'm poking fun at the extravagance of the royal court. So I thought it would be fun to make it out of a very humble material. And what I did, I started with 15 yards of burlap. I cut it down to 8.5. I taught myself how to make a pannier hoop out of old sheets and metal rods I got at Lowe's. And it's perfect. It's the real deal. And I just started draping the fabric, just draping, folding, tucking, pleating, cutting until I got the shape I wanted. I rarely, if ever, sketch out anything beforehand. I have it in my head. It's more of a sculpture almost. I've been called more of a sculptor than a fiber artist. I think it's somewhere between sculpture, designer, fiber artist, but that's how I went about making this particular dress. You'll notice the silhouette is a little more compact than these dresses. The hoop is a little bit smaller, but all of that fabric and the fact that I constructed it in one big piece kind of brings everything down and in. But I liked the silhouette, so I left it. These dresses are constructed in 3 pieces. That alleviated the problem of the weight, but it also made cleaning a whole lot easier. So if you got something on your sleeve, you just took the sleeve off and washed that and then put it back on. They wore a slip underneath, which was washed every time they wore the dress, and that protected the dress from any oils. I do have a train on this dress, which is not something you would normally do on an 18th century French royal court dress, but it's my version of a farthingale, if you will. It's a way to display my expanse of fabric and what I'm doing with it. Here's an image of the model. This isn't photoshopped. She actually climbed this wall with the pannier hoop and the dress, but you can see all of the work on the back here. And Tracy Fergoli took most of these photos of the dresses with the models. Las Hilanderas, or the Spinners, it's also referred to as the Fable of Arachne, is a very, very famous painting at the Prado. And I mention it for 2 reasons. The first reason is because it is the first time in history that the whirl, the spinning of the spinning wheel was recorded. This was huge, and that's what makes this painting very famous. I'm showing it to you today because I want you to understand the process. These people back then in the 17th century couldn't go down to Fiber Universe and buy their yarn. They had to make their yarn. The image on the right is the school I attended at Torrejon Air Force Base. And I'm so happy to have this image. I've reconnected with Air Force brats who were there when I was there, and Ken King gave this to me. And it means a lot to me because this is what I saw every day. And I would daydream, I would watch the sheep. I would want to know, how do you get the wool from the sheep into the tapestry? What happens? So briefly, let me run through and tell you, because I want you to get an idea of the amount of work that goes into just the prep before you even begin a tapestry or your art project. So obviously the wool is sheared, then it has to be washed. They didn't have running water, so they would have to go to a stream or a creek, haul the water back, start a fire, put a big kettle over it. They had to make their own soap. You wash and rinse. When I've done this process, it takes about 5 washings and rinsings to get all of the lanolin out, to get the vegetation out, and any of the dirt out of the wool. You lay it out to dry. That takes usually between 3 to 5 days, at least, depending on the weather. If it's raining, it's going to take longer. From there, it's handed, once it's dry, to the woman in the red skirt. And what she's doing is carding the wool. And if you all want to expand your screen for a minute, I'll show you some of the carders. Because when I honed in on it, and I can't do that right now, but I thought I would bring you my pair. Her carders are identical to the pair I use today. So not much has changed in several hundred years in how you do this part of the process. And you just comb the fibers. You have to get them straight. It's very hard on your shoulders. So once you've straightened the fibers, they're handed off to the woman with the spinning wheel. It's put up on this pole, this distaff, and she attaches yarn from the wheel and pumps the wheel. And what it does is it pulls and twists the fibers, and that's how you make yarn. I want to show you a merino wool fiber, one fiber under an electron microscope. Most of the wool in Spain is merino wool, the nicest wool you can buy. So here's an individual fiber. You see the ridges? So what happens when you pull and twist, the ridges catch, and that's what forms your yarn. It doesn't slide past, it grips. So when wool feels scratchy, that's why. So she spins, once she gets 50 to 100 yards, she hands it to the woman in the green skirt, who puts it on a swift, This looks very similar to what I use today. In her right hand, she has a ball of yarn. So what she's doing is she's pulling, and the swift will then rotate as she pulls the yarn, and then she's rolling, pulling and rolling. It's like reeling in a fish. So if you like fishing, catching fish, you love this part of the process. Now it's ready. Now, after all of that, it's ready to be woven into the tapestry. I'm not even going to mention finishing techniques before you do this, or a dyeing process, which would take several more days. But just for the sake of simplicity here, it's now ready to be woven. We have a lot of movement in this painting, and what's happening back here is a weaving competition. Arachne challenged the goddess Athena. Arachne lost. Athena turned her into a spider. Moral of the story is, don't take on the gods because you'll lose. Make sure you know your place. What is being woven into this tapestry is the Rape of Europa, a painting by Titian. Normally, men did the weaving and women did the spinning. Normally, the tapestries were allegorical, meaning a physical representation of an idea, something the king needed to remember, like honor, fidelity, loyalty, courage. I didn't see any tapestries at the Prado, so let's take a quick departure. I want to take you to the Castle of Segovia, where I saw the tapestries. And the reason I want to talk about the tapestries, well, for several reasons, because there's a lot we don't know about them that you've probably never heard. Also, because the tapestries taught me to think really, really, really big. So that's why they're important. This is the Castle of Segovia. It is Spain's premier fairy tale castle. It was the castle that was in the movie Camelot. I remember when they made that movie, it was a big deal in Spain. So when I went here, I remember walking in, and I don't know if it was this tower or this tower, but it was one of the tall towers. And there was this huge tapestry hanging all the way from the top to almost the floor. And I stood there with my mouth hanging wide open, thinking, how could anybody make something like this? And I estimated it then to be, and I think I was pretty accurate, about 30 feet by 12 feet long, 30 feet long by 12 feet wide. And the feeling you get when you see one of these tapestries is like if you saw the movie Gladiator, when the gladiators went to Rome, the movie with Russell Crowe, and they're going to fight at the Colosseum, and they get out of their wagon and they're all standing there like they can't believe how large this Colosseum is. And one of the men says, I didn't know men could build things like this. That's the feeling you get when you see the tapestries. I don't have the image of that particular one, but this is the royal bedchamber at the Castle of Segovia. You can see they cover the walls from ceiling to floor. Not only were they allegorical, but they served the purpose of warming up the castle. I saw this castle in the summer, and it was drafty, it was cold, it was damp, it was very uncomfortable. And I remember thinking, I would never want to live in a castle. I mean, it was a terrible feeling. Now, let's look at this particular tapestry. This was owned by Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. He was also Charles I of Spain. He had an enormous tapestry collection. This tapestry was large. It was about 27 feet by 17 feet. So you could fit almost 6 paintings of Las Meninas inside of this one tapestry. That's how large these things were. It looks like a Renaissance painting, right? Well, the reason is because many of the Renaissance painters drew the original. It was called a cartoon. They were called cartoon artists. Goya's first job in Madrid was as one of these artists. They were paid very well. They were very wealthy. Raphael did this kind of work. Bernard van Orly is responsible for this particular tapestry. It's called Vice. In the middle, you see a satyr. He's being beaten by Virtue, who's holding a bunch of sticks and beating him. There are many different stories going on here. This particular tapestry is part of a 9 tapestry series called Los Honores. So let's just get an idea of the expense, what went into making the tapestries, because we never hear about this. It was merino wool, it was silk brought to Spain by the Moors, the gold we talked about that Columbus brought back, and silver. In this series, many of these tapestries had over 44 pounds of gold woven into them. So these tapestries sparkle when you see them. All right, now as far as the weaving, so once you have this cartoon or this image that's drawn and painted, the weavers step in. Most of the weavers were from Flanders. That's where most of the tapestry weaving occurred. They were under a very tight deadline. Their reputation depended on completing these things on time, and that's how they got paid. So they would work late into the night, usually strapping a candle on their head so they could see what they were doing. Many of these artists went blind. They would work on the wrong side of the tapestry. So in order to see what they were creating, they would have to hold a mirror around to the front. So they're working in the dark and they're working backwards. It would take 1 year to create a 1 meter by 1 meter section. And normally you would have in a tapestry this size, maybe 4 weavers at a time working on the tapestries. This whole series took 65 years to complete. So that gives you an idea of the time and the amount of labor that went into it. Okay, so I want to tell you about Charles V because he used the tapestries as a major propaganda tool. The tapestries could be carried with him when he went. They could be rolled up, transported, hung inside his tents, outside his tents, above his throne, everywhere. It was like the biggest and most powerful moving art show you've ever seen in your life when he came to town. Everybody knew it. So he owned over 8,000 meters of these tapestries. Now, what does that mean? If we were to lay the tapestries out end to end, one right after another, they would stretch for 5 miles. So if we started at the Peoria Riverfront Museum, laid the tapestries out going north, you know where we would end up? I wonder if anybody knows. It would be Sid's in the Park. That's how far the tapestries would stretch. Now, I did a little calculation because I wanted to know, well, how much gold would be in that many tapestries? So I took 2 figures. I took a very, very conservative lowest denominator. I said, let's base it on 1 pound of gold per meter. Well, that works out to be 8,000 pounds of gold or 4 tons. If I base it on the tapestries in this series, 14 pounds of gold per meter, that comes out to 56 tons of gold. So you can start to imagine the wealth and what people thought when they saw this. Now, let me put it into a contemporary term for you. I don't know if you guys heard about the Mercedes that was unveiled in Dubai several years ago. It was an SL 600 that was studded with over 300,000 diamonds. It belongs to one of the Saudi Arabian princes. Here's the Mercedes. Some have been made with crystals. This was real diamonds. Okay, now what do you think you would think if you were driving down Main Street and this pulled up next to you? What kind of impact would that have when you saw something like this? This is how these people felt when they saw a tapestry. But when Charles V came to town, it wasn't just one of these Mercedes. It would be as if he crossed the Murray Baker Bridge and he had the whole company full, hundreds of these diamond-studded Mercedes, and they stretched all the way up Knoxville to Junction City. That's the kind of impact we're talking here with the way the wealth hit the people. I will also mention, just to put it in dollar terms, when Queen Isabella of Spain passed away, her possessions were sold. She had a painting called Isabella the Catholic. It was by Michel, can't remember his last name, Michel Citeaux, and Juana Flanders. It was a polyptych. It was a 12-panel piece. It was valued at $22,500. She also owned a tapestry called The Resurrection of Lazarus. That was valued at $2,250,000. So this is why I'm like, why don't we ever hear about the tapestries? We only hear about the paintings. The paintings during the Renaissance were magnificent, but these were even more so. So I want people to know about fiber art and the role it has played in history. And I think it's important to know these things. All right, back to the Prado real quick. I want to show you a few more paintings. This is a painting by Ronc, Little Prince Ferdinand, and I love this painting because I love his jacket and I love his Italian greyhound. I've had 5 Italian greyhounds. She looks like my Francie, so I really like this. Paintings like this inspired my big red dress, Wild and Woolly Bride. I had leftover burlap from Haute Couture Rustic, so I added lamb locks, hand-dyed lamb locks that I hand sewed. I felted, beaded, and embroidered the bodice. I'm going to show you close-ups in just a second. But I want to point this out because there is a major mistake, a glaring mistake with this dress, and I don't know if anybody can pick up on what that might be. But I'll tell you, it's the proportion. The length of the train is out of whack with the proportion to the height of the dress. And I knew something was off, but I wasn't quite sure. And then I wondered, well, did the Grand Masters use math in their paintings? So I just Googled, did the Grand Masters use math in their paintings during the Renaissance? And I couldn't believe all this stuff that popped up with the golden mean, divine proportions, sacred geometry, Fibonacci numbers. That was like the best day of my life, finding out about. I never knew about it, but now I use these numbers because they calculate what's the most pleasing proportion to the human eye, and I use them in everything I do now. They are like magic. I love those numbers. Here is Ferdinand's jacket. It was woven with silk and gold and silk and silver. Whenever you see embroidery like this is real silver thread. This is a Moorish influence. So you can see the wealth. You can see how it inspired the bodice of my dress. I didn't have real gold and rubies, but I did have some check glass and Swarovski crystals that I beaded. The embroidery is Italian silk. This is an ancient embroidery technique called couching, but you can see the influence here. There were many paintings. Now, when I was at the Prado, I misbehaved and I left the tour group because I wasn't interested in the paintings the tour guide was showing us. So I snuck away from the group, and that wasn't really a good idea, being only 10 years old and seeing some of the paintings I saw without somebody to explain things to me. But what I saw many paintings with fabric everywhere, literally coming out of the woodwork, this gorgeous fabric. Here, in the court of Philip V, coming out of the heavens with angels flying around, handsome men on stallions, and fabric flowing behind them. So I have this need to have fabric flying everywhere. Well, it came out in Mail Order Bride, my dress with bubble wrap and over 25 yards of plastic sheeting. I didn't know why I wanted all of that plastic sheeting. I just had to keep going. This was a photo for a magazine editorial. Again, Tracy Foley took this picture, but we picked up the sheeting and did it like a parachute, you know, when kids do the parachute, and got this great image. But it looks just like the painting. The collar, I didn't know why I wanted to make that. I crocheted it out of the bubble wrap and netting. Many paintings like this. Painting by Jordaens. Here he is with his family in a garden. And I love these colors. I really want to explore more about the colors, why they wore them, and how to make them. Now, as I mentioned, I was walking through the Prado by myself, and I saw many paintings that were very violent. The Spanish Inquisition hadn't been over for too long. It ended in 1834. I was there in the 1960s. So many paintings about people being burned at the stake, people being tortured on weird wooden contraptions, the Napoleonic Wars, Christ coming down off the cross and he's dead, people getting ready to be stabbed, a lot of this. And I'm walking around by myself seeing all this, and these paintings are huge. And it was starting to feel like the images were going to jump out of the paintings, like that movie Night at the Museum. I was starting to get a little creeped out because it really did, it felt that way to me. Here we have, this is called the Surrender of Breda, or Las Lanzas, or the Lances. And the reason I show you this, and as I'm walking through the museum, I saw it, it's large, it's about an 11 by 12 painting. And I wanted to experience this in real life because I had a small replica of this in my bedroom. It hung in my bedroom from the time I was 8 until I was, and from the time I was 10 until I was 18. All right, so I wanted to experience it up close. And I'm standing here by myself looking at it. And anyway, what we see is a battle in the background, and the two men in the front look pleasant enough. And what's happening is the surrender of the very Protestant town of Breda. General Van Nassau is handing over the key to the very Catholic and Spanish General Ambrosio Spinola of Madrid. Now, every night before I went to bed, I would lie in bed with the light on, and for about 20 minutes, I would stare at this painting. And I would imagine all sorts of things that could possibly happen. Because when you stand before this painting, you feel this real uneasiness, like one miscalculation, one misinterpretation, one loud noise, and all hell's going to break loose. And so I would think about this night after night after night. What could possibly go wrong, and how am I going to get out of it? And the one scenario I remember is the guy in the green shirt over here. For some reason, his gun goes off and it spooks the horse, and the horse jumps. I'm standing here in my mind. The horse lands on the arch of my foot and breaks my foot, and I fall down, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to get out of this situation. So this went on for years. And not only was the painting in my room, it's like, what little girl has this painting in her room? It's kind of weird to begin with, but the painting wasn't even framed like a normal painting. In each corner, there was a hand-forged wrought iron nail hammering the painting into a big block of wood, and that's how it hung on my wall. And the nails looked like the nails that hung Christ on the cross. So every night I looked at that, I was reminded of that too. So all of this like violent kind of war thing going on. So it's bound to affect you in some odd sort of way, and it did. Now, I don't know what you think about this, but this was last year when I was doing a residency at Prairie Center of the Arts. I was working on some dresses made out of film strips. Here I've made almost 800, this is just a portion of them, of these little rosettes. I cut the film strips and I wove them, but look how they're set up. This looks like a battle. I even have, look at the dress forms. They're like the general standing here. It looks like we have the 2nd Mississippi Infantry and the 54th Pennsylvania. I mean, maybe this is the Battle of Bull Run. I don't know, but it is set up like a battle. And I approach my art in when I'm organizing as if it's a battle. The dress that these went on to is called Ashokum Farewell. Even the name of the dress pertains to battle. Ashokum Farewell is the name of a tune. It's a song. And Heather, you and I were talking about Ken Burns earlier. Well, through his Civil War documentary that was so popular in the 1980s, he had this hauntingly beautiful song that wove its way throughout the whole documentary. It was called Ashokum Farewell. And Ken Burns, in my opinion, was a genius in recognizing that this tune, written in the style of a Scottish lament, captures that feeling of a war encampment after a battle. So this whole battle thing, there is a battle going on in every one of my dresses. Every dress. You see the train? You have to put the train. You never put a train on a dress like this, but I did. Underneath is an 1868 cage crinoline, which ironically is very similar to the original Spanish farthingale. It's a conical shaped armature that goes underneath. Dancing around words. This dress is at the Peoria Riverfront Museum right now on the lower level. Dancing around words refers to battles, to war, to the Civil War, many film strips pertaining to the Civil War, and to Native Americans. I was reading a lot of books about the Native American battles. I'm fascinated with battles, not the blood and gore, but I want to know how they happen and how could you avoid it or get out of it. I'm interested in these things, and I wanted to know about the Battle of Little Bighorn and the Fetterman Massacre. I was interested in Crazy Horse and how he ended up at Fort Robinson and his own people, Little Big Man stabbing him. You know, how did all of that come about? So that's what's going on inside of the dresses. Dancing around words refers to the lies, the broken treaties surrounding war. There are a lot of frills and flounces here. This is where I got my inspiration. I took flamenco dance when I lived in Spain. I studied flamenco guitar. I love this dance. And you can see the influence with the ruffles. I love the embroidered silk shawls. Actually, this is a Filipino influence called Mantilla de Manila, the silk embroidered shawls with all the fringe. This little girl, Claudia La Debla, in my opinion, is probably one of the best flamenco dancers in the world right now. She does a dance when she's about 10. And if you want to see an artist in the zone, you got to see this dance, because she's not just dancing flamenco, she is the dance. I've never seen anything like it. It's really pretty incredible. This is one more dress in the film strip series. This is called Hope is a Thing with Feathers. It's named after an Emily Dickinson poem of the same name. I like birds. Whenever I see a bird in a tree, it gives me hope. No matter what's going on in my life, a bird in a tree makes me happy. My first word as a baby was bird. We had strawberry Frenches. It wasn't mama or dada, it was bird. So anyway, I have this thing for birds. But the feathers on here, I made almost 8,000 feathers that I cut out of the film strips. They're actually wings on the side. There's rhyme or reason. I studied the feather placement on a ruffed ground. They aren't just all lined up in a row. There is movement here. Here I am working on it, cutting out the feathers. The fabric is the leftover fabric from a Shokum Farewell, and I pieced it together by hand to get the silhouette I wanted. Again, I didn't follow a pattern. I never follow patterns on these dresses. Now, this is about the most drawing I do, just to get an idea of the feather placement, because some had to be cut to the right, some to the left, some put together facing inwards, some facing outwards. You can see the placement on the breast there. There's a lot of movement there. You can see the beginning of a wing here on the side of the dress. When I was at Prairie Center of the Arts, from time to time, people would come through and tour. And one weekend, I wasn't there, but a man from out of state, I believe he was from Minnesota, came through and somebody took him on a tour. And when he got to my spot, he wanted to know if the artist was crazy and what would possess someone to want to cut out thousands of little feathers and sew them onto a cotton base. And I was really taken back by that, because I thought, well, it seemed perfectly normal to me, but I guess maybe it didn't. But anyway, I thought about what he said. I thought, well, that's actually a very good question. Why do I do this? I thought, first of all, no, I'm not crazy, because insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. That's not what I'm doing at all. As we've seen, I have a very definite battle plan from A to Z, and plan A, B, C, D, E, F in between. So I have enough flexibility to change what I'm doing to get to where I want to go. So no, I'm not crazy, but I do like repetition. And why is that? Why is it I want to do all that? And I think it is because so much of my life has been massively unpredictable, way too much unpredictability. And it's a constant feeling of the rug being yanked out from under me, and I'm flying through the air trying to land on my feet. So to do the repetition, cut out thousands of little feathers, offers me a little space and time where I have some predictability, where I know if I cut out so many little feathers and I can sew them onto this little section today, I know what's going to happen. And that gives me a real sense of comfort. A little unpredictability is good, but not as much as I've had. That's not a good thing. So I would like boring. I think boring would be good at this point in my life. But anyway, I think that's the reason for that. Now, 2 more paintings I want to show you at the Prado. Now, remember, I'm a 10-year-old little girl wandering around, and I have decided by this point that I need to rejoin the group, because I'm getting really creeped out and kind of upset walking around seeing all this stuff and nobody's explaining anything to me. So I'm walking, and I remember looking to the left and I saw this painting, and I knew this painting. This was by El Bosco in Spain. Hieronymus Bosch, we had a nickname for him. His name was El Bosco, like almost like he was a family friend kind of thing. We all knew about this painting, but I had never looked at it real closely. So I wanted to see it. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. And I'm, mind you, by myself. And I walk up and I'm like, what in the world? What in the world is going on here? And I'm thinking, this is just awful. And was this some party he went to? And then I'm like, well, I know that frog isn't real. They don't do that. And people don't have flowers growing out of body parts and stuff. And then I wanted to know, why was he so famous? Why did everybody think so much of him? Because this is obviously really a pretty sick painting. And that disturbed me. I didn't know what was going on. And then I looked at the dark panel again and I knew enough to know, I think this is hell. And then my heart started racing and I was starting to have, I think, a panic attack because I knew I had misbehaved that day at the Prado and disobeyed my mother, snuck away from the group, did my own thing. And I thought, you know what, I'm not ever going to be a bad girl again. I'm going to do everything my mother tells me to do because I don't want to die and go to hell. And then I thought, but I think the middle panel, I think this is heaven, but I don't want to go there either. So I ran out of this room and I'm really trying to find the group. I just want to get out of the Prado by this point. I'm starting to be traumatized by it all. And I ran down this hall and I turned around the corner and I looked up on the wall and I saw that. And this was it for me. I went blank. I literally left my body when I saw this is Goya's Saturn devouring his son. And I don't remember anything else about the Prado that day. I don't know how I reconnected with the group, how I got home. I don't even think I remembered the next year of my life after seeing this painting. It upset me so much. What it is by Goya, it is a series of one of a series of 14 paintings called his black paintings or his dark paintings. He painted this series on the actual walls of his home just outside of Madrid. And he would sit in the middle of the paintings and look at them. And what the images were, they were all terrible things. He lived through the Napoleonic War and through the Spanish Inquisition. And if you want to get an idea of what Goya went through, there's a really good movie called Goya's Ghost. I would recommend watching that because you get a real feel for him. And I will say, even though Goya traumatized me, really, I really think I have post-traumatic stress. And this was the final straw for me. He is my favorite artist. And I relate to him more than any artist who has ever lived. I get what he was doing with the paintings. People say, oh, Goya's crazy. He just went crazy. No, I don't think he was crazy. I think he was dealing with the horrific things he lived with day in and day out throughout his life. I relate to him because he was working it out. It's what I'm doing with the big dresses. I'm working something out. Like I said, there's a battle in every dress. To look at the dresses, they look like a fairy tale. But as we know, fairy tales are not pleasant. There's an ugly core at most fairy tales. There's an ugly core in every dress, something very ugly. That's the root. And I twist it around and make it come out into something beautiful. I'm working it out just like Goya is working things out. So yeah, if any artist could come back from the dead, I would want it to be Goya because I would really want to talk to him. I really, really would. So anyway, so I tell you these things because, you know, as artists, we come to where we are today by different paths. My path is very unique. I didn't go to college for art. I don't have a degree in art. I've never had a serious art class in my life. My visit to the Prado was my art class. And walking around by myself with nobody explaining anything to me. And I think that's one reason my work looks different. It's not like everybody else's work. I don't know the rules. I've been called a maverick and I've been called a whole lot worse, but I don't know. You don't know what you don't know. But I think it's that childlike quality that people connect with. I'm always surprised by the reaction I get from people to the dresses. And I think it is that childlike quality. I mean, I literally, when I say I am a traumatized 10-year-old little girl when it comes to art, I am. This is how I see art. This is how I approach it. When I sit down to write an artist statement about my work, and if I show it to someone, I showed it to someone a while ago, a statement I wrote, and that person didn't even say anything. And I thought, well, I thought I worked really hard on that. And then I went back and reread it like a week later, and I'm like, well, no wonder he didn't say anything. You know, it looks like a child wrote this. So there's something going on with me in that sense. But like I said, I think it's what makes it unique, and I've come to embrace that. You know, it is what it is. So anyway, here is my shop, the Sheared Edge, which is no more. I closed it July 31st, COVID. You know, I could have continued uh, and taken everything online. I don't know when things are going to come back to normal. I geared everything around First Friday and mobs of people. I I don't like to do the online thing. I like getting to know my customers. I had the best customers in the world. I love my customers, and I love dealing with my customers as much as I love making things. So I'm not doing that anymore. Mary Ruth, of course, passed away 5 years ago, and of course I miss her. But I'm letting my shoulder heal. As I mentioned before, you know, like the hand carding, the work I do, it is, and the film dresses took a real toll on my shoulder. So I'm getting treatment for that right now, and taking a break. But that's where things are right now. I hope that you have come away today with maybe a little bit better understanding of fiber art and why I have this passion for fiber art. And you know, I think it's important to know the history. So often we just operate on assumptions and go by things people have told us. I think most people don't realize the place that the woven tapestries had during most of the Renaissance, and how highly valued they were, and held in such high esteem by patrons of Renaissance art and the royalty. So I wanted you to know that, because I think it's interesting, and I think it's pretty exciting. So I thank you for listening to me today. And anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dana. I have a couple questions so far in the chat, and
Okay.
feel free, anyone, to chime in. If you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself at this time. Otherwise, I'll go to the chat questions. Let me pull them up. Do you use the sewing machine at all, or is everything done by hand?
Um, Sometimes, yes, I do. Occasionally, I use a serger more often than a sewing machine. I don't like sewing. Um, I have a hard time sewing a straight line. If I'm going to sew, I prefer to serge or do it by hand. But sometimes I do use a sewing machine.
Sorry. Okay. Do you have a dream dress, something you've always wanted to work on that you just haven't quite done yet?
Oh yeah, I do, absolutely. And that's a good question. When I made that big red dress, what I dreamed about doing and what I wanted to do was to make that dress and embellish it with real gold and real rubies. I would love to do something like that. But of course, you know, I don't know that that will ever happen, but absolutely.
That would be lovely.
Wouldn't that be beautiful?
That would be absolutely beautiful.
Oh,
What other materials do you see yourself using in the future?
I don't know. Like I said, I really want to explore more about the big collars and the wristlets. And I'm very fascinated with the Renaissance clothing, the farthingales, the and the undergarments. I find undergarments very, very interesting, and I would like to learn more and explore that whole aspect of clothing.
How does film fit into being fiber art?
Okay, well, to quote Tracy Growy Percher, and I like her definition, anything linear that can be manipulated. Anything linear that can be manipulated can be considered for fiber art. And I think that's the best definition I've heard.
Very nice. Yes, Mary Jo, this was recorded and we will get this up on YouTube. So you'll be able to watch the whole program. And then Patty, the inspiration came from a lot of the art pieces that Dana was showing, and I'll be sure to send you the presentation once it's uploaded to YouTube so you can rewatch that as well. Did we have any other questions that people wanted to ask themselves?
Yes. I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Leslie.
Hey,
Thank
Leslie.
you. Hi, Dana.
Hey.
I was wondering, with the tapestries, with as much gold as was in them, how did they display these? They would be so heavy to get onto a wall. Do you know the process?
I don't know exactly how I don't know, but we know they did. I'm not sure. I do know Charles V hung them on the outsides of his tents, on the insides of his tents, but exactly what they did, I'm not sure. But that's a good question.
Okay.
Yep.
I've seen tapestries hung before using metal circles sewn into the back all the way along the tops, and then those are hung on rods. I've also seen it where they make a fabric sleeve for the entire backing of the piece and then put a rod through that. So those are the two ways I know of.
Right, and that's how they hang the quilts, absolutely. So it was probably something along those lines would be my guess.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone have another question for Dana? Have you ever thought of putting together a book of the photos?
Of which photos? Of
I would guess.
The photos of the dresses?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, I hadn't. But that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Thanks for me, Dana.
Yeah.
This is Sally. I haven't seen you for a long
Sally,
time.
how are you? Yeah, no, that's
I'm doing great. I'm doing great.
Good.
But those photos of the models, and even on looking at the photos on your Facebook page, I think it would make a fabulous book.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Tracy Fergoli was the photographer for the models, and she did a beautiful job with that. And Craig Stocks took the photos of the film strip dresses.
I think it would just be a fabulous book.
Thank you.
I'd buy one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Me too.
I appreciate that.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending Art Club today. It was a fabulous talk, Dana. So a huge thank you to you for presenting your work and talking a lot about fiber art, which is, for me, a lot of the information is new. So it was wonderful to learn and hear.
Thank you.
And be sure to tune in next month, Tuesday, January 12th at 1 p.m. And we will be hosting Jessica Bingham for a special presentation of their work. So thanks also goes to museum members and Visionary Society members for their continued support of all of our virtual programming. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you,
Bye.
Heather. And thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
All righty. Bye-bye.